Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is Let's Have Renaissance, a podcast about literature and the arts. I am Ito Otini.
And I'm Makaya Otini, and today we're speaking with Eric Lyon. Eric is a composer, computer musician, spatial music researcher, and audio software developer. In 2016, he served as a guest editor of Computer Music Journal, editing 2 issues and curating their first binaural sound anthology. He's also been honored with a Giga-Hertz Prize from ZMK, a Guggenheim Fellowship, and others. We're excited to be with him today.
Thank you for tuning in. We're excited that you're here. Why don't you also subscribe, like, comment, and share this episode with your friends?
And if you know anyone who wants to come on the podcast, please do send them our way. Also, if you haven't yet, sign up for our free newsletter where we share updates, resources, and opportunities. To support the podcast, you can make a one-time donation through our website or purchase a subscription to our blog where you'll find more premium content and resources at thedatekeepers.com. Thank you for being a part of our community.
Eric, thank you so much for joining us. We're excited to have you. Can you tell us a bit about yourself and what are you working on now?
Absolutely. It's great to be here. I'm a composer and have always been interested in music. I started studying violin when I was 5 years old, and when I was 11, I discovered that I was hearing music in my head, so I started writing it down. When I was an undergraduate at Princeton, I discovered computer music, since Paul Lansky was a professor in the music department at the time. This was in 1982, and computer music looked very different then than it does now. Back then, it meant running Fortran code on mainframe computers and then using specialized equipment to convert digital data into sound. It was necessary to learn computer coding to do anything interesting, and I picked up that skill very quickly. In 2003, when I was teaching at Dartmouth, I became interested in the possibilities of spatial sound. I asked my colleagues John Appleton and Larry Polanski if we could build an 8-channel studio. They both agreed, so we did. And I immediately started composing multi-channel computer music, and that remains a focus of mine to this day. Now, as far as what I'm working on right now, as is often the case, I'm working on many different things, but I'll just tell you a few of the main ones. Right now, I'm composing a piece for the Cirrus Blue Quintet. It's a wind quintet, but replacing the traditional French horn with a saxophone. I'm also working on a computer music piece called Eric, This Is So You Coded. Thank you.
I like that.
Thank you. Which will explore the possibilities of vibe coding for generating dynamic timbres in spatial motion. I'm also working with a team at Virginia Tech to put on CubeFest 2026 Spoken Words. This is a festival dedicated to music conceived for high-density loudspeaker arrays, and we have several such facilities at Virginia Tech. I started this festival back in 2016, and we've been doing it ever since. As part of CubeFest, I'm currently spatializing the De La Soul album 3 Feet High and Rising for 148 loudspeakers to be performed in the Virginia Tech Cube. And I'm very excited about that. That's an amazing album, and I'm just having so much fun working with it. I'm also preparing 2 different software collections for public distribution. The first is Lion Potpourri, which is a collection of audio objects for the media manipulation program called Max. This will integrate my collection Lion Potpourri into the package manager of Max, which will make it very easy for anybody who owns that program to just load up my own software. A lot of my interactive computer music is for Max, and it relies on my software extensions to Max, so getting Lion Potpourri into the package manager will just make this music much more accessible to musicians. I'm also preparing a collection of software called Slewable Utility for Randomized Parameters, or SLURP. This is code that can be attached to any VST plugin loaded in Max. And VST plugins, that's short for Virtual Studio Technology. These are these little bits of software that are used by almost anybody who does any music production. They load them into whatever software tools they're using, like Ableton Live or FL Studio or Pro Tools. Well, actually not Pro Tools, but these tools, like any sort of electronic music interface, have a lot of different parameters. And usually people only manipulate relatively few parameters. But this software that I've designed allows you to very easily manipulate all of the parameters of a VST plugin, which might either be generating sound, working as a synthesizer, or processing some sound that's coming into it. And the result is that you can get extremely dynamic, unpredictable, and really interesting timbres when everything is in motion, because you might have hundreds of parameters moving at the same time. So I'm very excited to release that to the public. That's probably going to happen in a couple of months. And just because that particular way of working with audio processing is so data intensive, I suspect that it may have some applications for AI/machine learning. So those are a few of the projects I'm working on at this time.
This is really cool.
So, okay, there's a lot to get into there, but the first question I have for you is, you said at 11 you realized that you were hearing music in your head. What was it that you thought you were hearing before you realized it was music?
Oh, that's very simple. It was just the voices in my head. No, I mean, I always loved music. I mean, my parents tell me that when I was 3 years old, I had this toy but functional phonograph, and I would crawl across the room to put records on it and play it, even before I could walk. And so anytime I would hear something, I would just be kind of amazed by it. And, since my parents love music, they always go to concerts of all kinds, and they took me to concerts. I was constantly hearing all kinds of music and just really loving it. And so I think at first you kind of rehearse, because I was a practicing violinist. I kind of put that aside in my early 20s. I played in orchestras when I was in high school and also when I was at Princeton, but gradually composition became much more compelling to me, so I put the violin aside for the most part. But, when you're working on pieces, you're kind of rehearsing them in your head, so those are some of the things that you're hearing, but I think just naturally I have a tendency to take things in and scramble them up and reconfigure them. And so at a certain point, I realized, okay, I'm hearing music, but these aren't pieces that I recognize. So let's write it down and see what happens. And I just can't tell you how exciting and amazing it was to start, first of all, to write music down and then play it back. First, I wrote pieces for violin that I would play back. And then since I had a little tape recorder, I wrote pieces for 2 violins. And then I would record one part and then play over it. And it was just so exciting. And then I naturally started to take music to some of my friends in high school who played classical music instruments and started making music for them. So I was just driven by excitement. I mean, I heard these things, I wrote them down. It was just so much fun to do. And there was just no limit to what you could explore. And even though now it's very long after those initial forays into music, I must confess that I still have that same excitement about working with music.
And you don't seem to be afraid of AI taking over your field. Can you talk more about that? A lot of people in the arts are so afraid of AI. Can you talk about your position?
Absolutely. The first thing I would say is that for any creative artist, fear is the mind killer. So I try not to be afraid of anything, at least when I'm composing. I am not afraid of AI, but I will say that I'm amazed by how quickly it has evolved. As a musician, I feel that we are in 1996. The year 1996 for musicians. And the reason I say that is 1997 was when program Deep Blue defeated the best human chess player, Gary Kasparov. And so before then, people thought, these programs are good, but humans are better. Well, we woke up one day in 1997 and all of a sudden they weren't. I think it was 20 years later, a much more complicated game, the game of Go, was also finally a program, an AI-based program was able to defeat the best human player. So that has not happened in music yet. I will say on the one hand, The first time I introduced vibe coding, because there's this class I created for Virginia Tech called Digital Sound Manipulation. I think of this class as computer music for the people, because it's designed to teach people computational thinking in the context of working with sound, but it doesn't require prior experience in either coding or in music. You don't need to know how to read music. You don't need to know how to code. And I take you into using software to generate sound and music, and students really enjoy that. And I think it was 3 years ago now that I first brought vibe coding into the class. And vibe coding is when you use a prompt to have an LLM, a large language model, generate code for you. And I brought in some vibe coding in a computer music language called SuperCollider. It's text-based, so it's very appropriate for vibe coding. And the reason I brought it in was to make fun of how bad it was, because it was really, really terrible. You'd ask it to do something like imitate an ocarina sound, and you would just get these sawtooth waves. Half the time, the code wouldn't even work. But I pointed out at the time, this is obviously not working very well, but I wouldn't put money on this remaining at this level of capability. And sure enough, a few years later, vibe coding has gotten better. It's not as good as humans are, but I would not be surprised if in maybe a few years, I don't know, 5 years, 10 years, a computer could beat me at that. And the same thing with composition. A couple of programs showed up, I think around 2023. One of them was called Suno, and one of them was called Udio. They worked surprisingly well, but the reason they did, I think, is because they were focusing on music in genres that had a lot of very similar kinds of music. So various kinds of subgenres of techno, for example, country and western music, synth pop music. And they must have done a lot of work to classify all of these different kinds of musical genres. And since this music is often very formulaic, and that is in no way meant to be pejorative, a great deal of wonderful music is in some ways very formulaic, including a lot of historical classical music. But anyhow, I think because there was so much structure, there was so much similarity among hundreds of thousands or even millions of examples of music, these musical AIs were able to generate new music quite impressively. But what they didn't seem to really be good at is generating something, for lack of a better word, new, something that takes you from 0 to 1. And there are many examples in the history of all kinds of genres of music where composers just make a decision that just breaks out of their genre. They just push things further. For example, you get a Beatles song like Hey Jude, which is far longer than would ordinarily be acceptable for a pop music single. So humans seem to really have a good facility for breaking the rules. I think that that's what it comes down to. We're really good rule breakers, and AI, because by design, it's a kind of an applied statistics that tries to smooth off anomalies, to kind of push them out and to optimize and do curve fitting. AI tends to squeeze out the possibility of something genuinely new happening. That being said, as I said, it's 1996 for musicians right now. I would put money on some conceptual breakthrough with AI technologies that would enable it to jump the curb and start breaking rules the way humans do. And at that point, I think the implications of AI are going to be pretty amazing. I wouldn't say scary, but it's going to be one more kind of ontological shift. And again, I don't think that this is something that musicians need to be worried about, because we are used to, those of us who are familiar with our various histories of music, we're used to things changing all the time. We're constantly being de-skilled and re-skilled. There are all sorts of skills that as a classical musician you might have needed in 1800 that you definitely don't need now, or only a few very specialized musicians would need it. For example, there was a time when part of your musical education would be that you'd be put in a room with some manuscript paper and a pencil and given a fugue subject and be expected to just write out a correct 4-voice fugue. Just work it out in your head. And not a lot of people have those skills anymore. They're not really useful for the kind of music that most people are working on. But just as one thought experiment, there are 16 Beethoven string quartets, and each one of them is exquisite and unique and has a special character. They're all wonderful. But what would happen if you could press a button on an AI and get 1,000 more Beethoven quartets that were just as good as those 16? We can't now, but who knows, maybe in the future?
Okay, so you brought up Kasparov. Let me see what you think of this. I'm wondering if that analogy actually holds, because the thing about chess is it's a very rule-based game. And Deep Blue wasn't programmed to learn how to break rules. Deep Blue was programmed to know the rules so well that it could figure out what all the parameters were, and it could predict into the future what a series of moves would lead to. And you can look at that event and say Gary Kasparov was beaten by one computer, or you can look at that event and say, actually, Gary Kasparov was beaten by all the best chess players in the world all ganging up on him at one time, because what Deep Blue was drawing on was a library of all of the chess moves that human players had made or could have made or had conceived of making while programming it. And I'm not sure that's a perfect parallel to what's going on in the music world or just the creative arts in general, because part of what makes a piece of music good is that it does something unexpected and it violates an expectation. And I don't know if an expectation is the same as a rule, but I wonder what you think of that. I'm thinking through this in real time as we're talking. And I'm not saying that AI will not be able to do what you're suggesting it may do, but I'm not sure that Kasparov and Deep Blue is the best analogy. What do you think?
Well, first of all, I love that challenge. So thank you for that. That's a great question. And I guess my answer to that would be that a large amount of music might be a lot more rule-based than one might think.
Well, yes, the music is rules-based, but I think what you just said a minute ago is that the thing that makes the music come alive are the moments when it breaks the rule or it breaks the expectation that's been set up. And so the rules are a necessary component because they enable themselves to be broken. If they didn't exist, then there couldn't be a breaking away from them, and there couldn't be that moment of surprise and delight. But on their own, the rules are not enough to make a wonderful piece of music.
Thank you for that. I'll say a few things. There's one very particular way in which music is very different than chess. Chess is a zero-sum game. One person wins, the other person loses, or in some rare situations, they draw. Music is a win-win situation, right? I mean, everybody, and this is kind of what I love about music. Everybody who is engaging in music is gaining some joy in different ways. The creative artist is maybe able to go beyond what he or she thought was possible and is creating something that is very satisfying. Performers will ideally love playing music and especially bringing something new into the world. People who go to hear the music, hopefully they will have a great experience. So if music is a game, it's a game that everybody can win all the time. Also, in a way, it's less measurable because whether someone wins or loses at chess is not subject to debate. It's simply testable according to fixed rules. But whether a piece of music is wonderful or terrible or so-so, you're going to find a wide variety of different reactions. I mean, I might absolutely love a piece of music that might make someone else run screaming out of the room in terror. So that subjective piece, I think, is not really testable. But what I will say is that there's a really interesting question about how rules-based is a particular musical practice. And I think that in some ways, there are some people like Leonard B. Meyer, for example, who've argued that the way that music evolved in the 20th century, modernism essentially, was kind of an anomaly. And in the 1960s, he suggested that we were going to be moving away from what he saw as an anomaly. And I think one of the big ideas underlying that anomaly was the idea of progress, that each new generation builds on the lessons of the past, and music keeps on getting better and better and more complex and more interesting and things like that. And he said that's not really how things work. He suggested that there's more like this kind of dynamic stasis, and people will constantly be trying different things, but there isn't really going to be a mainstream, and it isn't just going to be one kind of line that says that you need to have, let's say, plain chant first before you can get to Palestrina. You need to have Palestrina before you can get to Bach. You need Bach, Johann Sebastian Bach, before you get to CPE Bach to get to Mozart. You need Mozart before you can get to Beethoven. You need Beethoven before you can get to Brahms. And then things get a little weird. I mean, you could kind of say that you need Brahms before you get to Schoenberg, but in some ways, Schoenberg has deviated so wildly from the systems underlying Brahms that it's hard to say that there's that linear idea. So anyhow, my point is that so much of music, and I'm just looking at the classical European style of music, but there are many other practices of music in the world that I think a similar analysis would reveal to be true, which is, again, that the anomalies, the parts where you really break out, are the minority of the moves that get made. And those would be, let's say, high information moves, and relatively low information moves, predictable moves, sequences, for example, in Bach. From one bar to the next, you can predict more or less every single note that's going to be in the next bar just based on the fact that one bar is a sequence continuing the bar before it. So anyhow, the thing is, in the time of modernism, there's this Cambrian explosion of every kind of experiment. And this is part of why I love the music of the 20th century so much. It's moving in every different direction, and composers are feeling much more, maybe even a kind of artistic market pressure to really differentiate themselves from everybody else and really differentiate their own styles, their own areas of interest, so that, for example, Morton Feldman is a contemporary of Karlheinz Stockhausen, but there's no way that you're going to confuse a Morton Feldman piece for a Karlheinz Stockhausen piece. So anyhow, you have this mad scramble in every direction, and I think it's just fun and really cool and exciting to kind of put your head back into that world. That is not what's happening today, in my opinion. And I think one of the most fascinating things about the way music has evolved in the early 21st century is in what it hasn't done. Because if you look at the first couple of decades of the 20th century, you get these radical shifts. You get first a kind of, I'm not sure exactly how I want to phrase this, but let's say more or less a large-scale abandonment of the tonal system, an exploration of tonal chromatic music, Arnold Schoenberg's development of the 12-tone method. You have people exploring alternative tuning systems. You have people exploring alternative rhythmic systems. And you get these huge works that are just very influential, like Igor Stravinsky's The Rite of Spring, for example, or Schoenberg's Pierrot Lunaire. So those works that just really shake things up and really kind of take whatever dominant paradigm there is and, flip it on its head, those works don't exist in the 21st century, as far as I can tell, at least in music. I can't think of anything in the first quarter century of music that has had a kind of conceptual impact like The Rite of Spring that galvanized people in that way. So what was going on instead? So this is just my own little crank theory, which is that what's happening at that time is, going into the 21st century, you have this kind of increase of what has been called big data. All of a sudden, huge amount of data has been collected on computers, and you have these neural nets that have been around since the late 1950s, actually. So they've been around for a long time. But now you've got much more powerful computers. You've got networks that can put all of this data at everybody's fingertips, and you've got code that's just trying to make sense of it. And then you get things like YouTube. I believe that that's from 2006. And so all of a sudden, it used to be that as a composer, one would just buy lots and lots of records and then CDs, and you would have your own collection of music that you really wanted to listen to. I remember teaching with my own personal collection because even libraries didn't have a lot of what I had. And then all of a sudden, YouTube shows up and everything very quickly becomes available instantly. It's a complete ontological shift in terms of the availability of music. And so part of what I have seen with younger composers is they are very interested in genre, and they are very fast at learning what the salient features of genre are. Like they'll listen to some Jersey club and figure out how they can make something that's like a Jersey club track or a future bass track. And so what's happening is rather than the drive to innovate in the way that we think of innovations in the 20th century, people are very interested in making versions of things that already exist. And I think that that's a side effect of composers coming online who are digital natives, who just have access to huge amounts of music, because our composition students listen to a lot of music. It might be different music than what I listen to, but they are listening to a lot of it. So again, to get back to your question, what I would suggest is that if we look at the 20th century as something of a weird speed bump, I mean, it's a gross oversimplification, but let's say that it's just very different than the 19th century, very different now. It looks to me like the 21st century. Then we're going back to a much more rules-focused kind of music. Writing music where, let's say, 90% of what's happening in the music is being determined by rules. And some of those rules are rules that the composers have internalized. But to make this even more intensified, a lot of the tools that younger composers are working with are helping to make decisions for them that are also having a kind of rules-based, very AI-centric, and in a lot of cases, just flat-out AI application of, let's say, using AI to master your track. So, I mean, AI has, quote unquote, listened to 1 million tracks and has figured out what is the optimal way of adjusting the relative frequency balance or the equalization of the track. AI is doing that for people. People are, rather than making their own sounds from scratch, which is something I enjoy teaching my students how to do, and some of them seem to enjoy it, a lot of them are just downloading sounds from Splice or online from Freesound. So you have this organizational principle that is gently guiding people to a certain kind of conformity. But again, I do not at all mean that in a pejorative way. I think that what's happening in musical creation in the 21st century is strange and wonderful and new. But I think that it's different. And I think in a way, humans have been writing more AI-like music in the first 2 decades of the 21st century, even before AI generating tools, the modern ones, come online. So, sorry, let me answer your question, but I hope that helps.
No, I love that. It's a much more nuanced and fine-grained and I think convincing version of an idea that we've encountered talking to various composers, which never quite sat right with me, I think, because it was not fully developed. And I think your version is much more fully developed. And I guess the raw version that I've been exposed to is that, as you said, there was something akin to a Cambrian explosion in the 20th century around the 70s and 80s. And now there's just not any more new territory to explore because all of the territory has been explored. And so it depends on, the frame of mind of the person articulating this, but either it's leading to a great stagnation or it's great because we have access to just sort of every kind of music in the world. But there was just something a little bit one-dimensional about that narrative. And I appreciate the depths that you've gone into to sketch out something that I find a little bit more convincing.
Well, thank you for that. I would say that where I see people getting really nervous, a lot of it has to do with economic aspects of AI. I mean, I think everybody is really worried. Like, is AI going to put us all out of work or most of us out of work? And the only model that I'm aware of that might be a little bit similar for what people are afraid of is the Industrial Revolution, at least the first Industrial Revolution, where agriculture becomes mechanized. In the United States, you start from a point where about 80% of US citizens are farmers, they're agriculture workers, and then it plummets. It drops to about 2%. Then it gradually bumps up a little bit because all of the mechanization, industrialization creates a few new jobs, but I don't think it ever really gets more than up to 10 or 12%. And then what happens is people move to the city, they have other jobs. But what would happen in the United States if 80% of people lost their jobs within 5 years? I'm not sure if anybody has a really good plan for how to deal with that. And so, meanwhile, musicians who have, I think, always been the avant-garde of precarity, in a way. There's never really been a great economic model for musicians, except for a tiny, tiny percentage of people who do fabulously well in pop music, people like Beyonce, for example. But I think for a lot of folks who are doing the kind of music that I'm doing, the most stable economic situation by far is teaching. And, there are only a limited number of jobs there. One starts to wonder, well, are they going to take these jobs away too? Because in that class, I teach digital sound manipulation. I teach Super Collider, which is a pretty complicated program. And we've had some very interesting conversations in class about AI. And some of the students just will not touch it, for some very good reasons. They understand that when I'm giving them assignments to work on, that's to help them develop skills and understanding, and they want to acquire those skills, and they want to acquire that understanding, and having an AI do their homework for them is not going to do it. But others are maybe having some trouble with the program, and so one student said, yeah, so I'm having ChatGPT teach me how to learn Super Collider. And so my initial reaction was, oh, so ChatGPT is taking my job. Cool. Cool.
Well, I mean, I don't know. AI can take my job. But the question is it possible for me to create another job for myself? Can I become creative and come up with something else that I will do? Nowadays, a lot of people work for a show. There are a lot of titles out there that don't make any sense. Like, manager this, manager that. I was one once. I was a manager at a company. And to the outside world, I was, this big title, bigger than me. I am a small person. I am petite. So the title was so big. And, to the outside world, it was like, wow. But to me, since like the day I got that job, I forgot about the title and everything. It was paying my bills, right? And I knew in the first day that I was not needed. I was hired to represent the company and to write for them. And then when I told them, this is what you guys hired me for, they said, we don't need your writing. Like, your writing is international, which really didn't make any sense. My husband and I make fun of that. But it was paying a lot. It was paying me a lot of money to do nothing. And I remember this guy, really sweet old guy, came to me and he said, what do you do for the company? And I was so exhausted because, you know why? Because I was in this fancy hotel eating really expensive, fancy foods that were extremely processed and not good for my health. And I was, having to dress up all the time. I got so exhausted. And the guy asked me, what is your role? What do you do? And I said, I'm not really sure. And my husband squeezed my hand and I said, oh, no. I mean, I do a lot. It's just hard to summarize. And that was it. I was like, I'm going home and I'm done with this. Like, I don't want this anymore because I don't know how to lie. I don't know how to fake things. I don't know how to, come up with things that I don't do. Even in my fiction, I don't have to come up with a lot of things because I met a lot of the characters I quote unquote invent. So, yeah. And I remember when I was there, I thought, I need to build something that challenges me, that makes me work actually hard, because that's the only thing I know how to do. I don't know how to be lazy. And I started building the business. And of course, neither of us has an MBA or, we didn't study how to make money out of your stories or whatever. And I think it was like 3 or 5 months after I left the job, our business started to thrive. So it's what you do with yourself, in my opinion, is what matters. With the job loss, if it's financial, it's terrible. But if it's not, I don't think people need jobs. I found something else. Is it easy? No. It's so hard to work for yourself and make something out of yourself. Is it worth it? Heck yeah. It's satisfying. You feel like you're a real manager,
Uh-huh.
like you're managing actually things, you're doing things, and you feel like you're changing people's lives. Just for example, with our podcast, bringing people on, bringing people together is a million times more satisfying than being an executive of nonsense.
Well, thank you for that. There's so much to unpack there, and I think everything that you said from a number of different perspectives really deals with some of the difficult problems that are coming to the surface as a result of what AI is already doing. I mean, it's hard enough to already deal with what is just in front of us, but when we imagine what might be coming a few years away, then it really does make one pause. You mentioned that there seemed to be a paradox between having an exalted title and yet maybe not doing something very important. And this is something I've noticed. I mean, I have good friends who are very high up in administration in academia, and I've kind of floated by them because I have deliberately gone out of my way to make myself unemployable in any administrative position.
Good for you.
They just see me coming and they just like run away. It's like, honey, I shrunk the department. And that is by design because I always knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to do creative things, and I saw people moving up the administrative ladder and, getting paid more, at least a little bit more, sometimes a lot more, maybe even being treated with respect, although maybe I shouldn't go that far. The thing is that it seemed to me that the higher people go in administration, the less freedom they actually have. They're so constrained by the structures of the institution itself. And this is not that institutions are bad. I was much younger. I thought that I was an anarchist, but as one gets older, one reviews one's political views
Yeah.
a little bit.
Updating them every year, like Apple.
Yeah, it's like people do need structure. I need structure. My friends need structure. And institutions can provide structure. And the question is always, is the institution bringing more benefit to people than causing harm? And that's always, a question that's up for debate. And, how dynamic is the institution? Can it actually change and respond to different circumstances as the world changes? But, I've heard examples of folks who are CEOs of some of these companies that are making some of the most powerful AIs, and they've been mulling over the idea of a universal basic income. They're mulling over whether there should be an AI tax. Like, if an AI agent replaces a human worker, should that AI be paying a tax that will essentially support that worker who has been displaced? And then I think one of the most important things that you had mentioned is the question of meaning. I mean, yes, obviously, we have basic needs that we need to have met. We need to have enough food, clean water, a place to sleep, hopefully some companionship, friendship, things like that. And then after that, you want to feel that you have some higher purpose, that there's something about your life that is not just about yourself, that you're in some way contributing maybe to the well-being of other people, that you're maybe, building some things that will live on after your lifespan. And so, some people find that in religion, some people find that in teamwork of various kinds. But this is, in a way, a problem that maybe can be exacerbated by AIs, but it definitely, in my opinion, can't be solved by AIs because it's baked into the human condition. And there's no technological solution for the human condition. We're just kind of stuck with who and what we are.
This has been fun. Thank you so much, Eric. We really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. It has been such a pleasure speaking with you.
I wish we had more time, but we've got to sign off. We've got another interview coming up, but keep it up. Stay in touch. Really nice talking to you.
Thank you so much, and I look forward to hearing the podcast.
Awesome.
Okay, bye-bye now.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.